The great chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with a quiet hum of alien voices. 1,000 shapes and colors gathered under the high glass dome, the light from 2 burning suns streaming through the windows and casting long shadows across the floor. Banners of every known civilization hanging from the walls like a silent reminder of power and unity. Yet today the air was not calm. It was heavy, charged with the heat of an argument that had not even begun. In the center stood a tall platform of black stone where the speakers faced the whole assembly, and on it stood a figure with silver-scaled skin for dark eyes and a voice that carried like a blade to the hall. He was known as Scholar Varken, one of the highest historians of the Threx Empire, and his words struck like the opening shot of a war. Humans, he said, were a mistake. They were the descendants of beasts, nothing more than clever animals who had clawed their way into space through violence and chance, unfit for the honor of sitting in the council of the civilized. His voice dripped with disdain. His claws tapped against the podium in sharp rhythm, and each tap seemed to echo the same thought into heads of those who listened, that humanity did not belong here, not among them, not in this chamber of order and reason. A wave of whispers moved through the crowd, some voices agreeing, others laughing quietly, a few only watching in silence. Captain Elias Warver stood in the human section, his shoulders square, his dark uniform crisp, the small silver emblem of Earth Command shining on his chest. He listened without moving, his eyes fixed on Varken, as if studying every breath and every shift of muscle. The insult had been expected, but the venom in the alien's tone was deeper than he had guessed. Yet, Elias did not speak. Not yet, not until the right moment. Varken continued, his scaled hand spread, as if to embrace the whole galaxy. He spoke of the Threx people, of their rise from the cradle of their homeworld, of their perfection, of how they were born from the purest design of the first makers, not from crawling creatures in the dirt, not from the chaos of instinct and blood. Every word was polished and sharp, a performance made to convince the council that humans were not only dangerous, but beneath them all. To let them remain was to invite ruin. When he finished, the silence that followed was not one of agreement. It was a silence that waited for the next blow, and Elias knew it was his turn. He stepped forward from the human section, the sound of his boots against the smooth black floor like slow drums in the still air. All eyes turned to him, and for a breath he said nothing. He only looked at Varken, then at the gathered faces of dozens of species, some with eyes like glass, some with mandibles, some with faces hidden behind smooth masks of bone or metal. He took a breath and his voice came low and even. "Humans came from beasts," he asked, and his words carried through the hall like a quiet thunder. "And you didn't?" The word seemed simple, almost too simple, yet the effect was instant. A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Some gasped, some frowned. A few leaned forward as if they had not heard correctly. Varken's eyes narrowed, his head tilting like a predator sizing a prey. But Elias did not look away, his stance unshaken. "You speak as if your people were born in silk," Elias said, his tone still calm but carrying an edge like a drawn blade, "as if you rose from nothing but perfection. But tell me, scholar, do you dare claim your people never knew hunger, never fought for survival, never bled in the dirt for life itself?" The silence thickened, and in that silence the twin suns outside burned brighter, their light cutting across the chamber and catching the polished stone of the floor. The shadows stretched longer, darker. The air felt warmer, as if the stars themselves were leaning closer to listen. Varken's claws tapped again against the podium, a slow, deliberate sound, yet his voice had lost a shade of its certainty. "My people," Varken said, "were chosen by the first makers, shaped in their image. Our rise was by design, not by the chaos of evolution." Elias stepped closer to the center of the chamber, his boots stopping just at the line where the speaker's space began, the human envoy now standing where his voice would carry to every ear. "Chosen," he said, "and yet you fear the truth. You speak of first makers, but you cannot show them. You speak of your creation, but you cannot prove it. We bring our history with open hands. We show the bones of the creatures we once were. We tell the story of our rise from the wild because it is part of who we are. Can you do the same?" The hum of alien whispers began again, louder now. Scattered voices in a dozen languages, some angry, some curious. The Threx delegation sat stiff as stone, but others shifted in their seats, the question hanging in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Varken's eyes shifted to the side as if searching for support, but none of the other Threx moved to speak. In the gallery above, where off-world visitors and lesser diplomats watched, the reaction was even more divided. Some aliens leaned forward with interest, others muttered about human arrogance. Yet none could deny that the question had struck deep. It was not only the humans who might have animal blood in their past. It was possible for all, and that thought, once spoken aloud, could not be taken back. Elias felt the shift, small but certain, the control of the moment sliding from Varken's claws into his own hands, and he pressed on, his voice still steady. You say we are beasts, that we are dangerous because of it. But I ask you, is it not the struggle of the beast that makes the mind sharp, the heart strong, the will unbroken? We learn because we had to. We built because we had no choice. We reached the stars not by design, but by the fire inside us. And that fire is something you cannot make in a lab. It is born only in the fight to survive. Varken's tail twitched, a small sign of agitation. His voice came again, but it was lower now. And that same fire is why you bring war wherever you go. Elias did not flinch. War is not born from the beast alone. Scholar, it is born from fear, and I see fear in this chamber. Fear what humans are, or perhaps fear what you might find in your own history. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere among the reptilian delegation to the left, and one of their numbers shifted uneasily. The sound of claws scraping lightly on the arm of his seat, small details but not missed by the crowd. The seeds were planted. The doubt was spreading, and once doubt entered the council chamber, it could not easily be erased. For a long moment neither man nor alien spoke. The hall filled only with the sound of the two suns' faint hum as their light shifted in color, painting the glass dome above in red and gold, a reminder that time was moving forward, and that this session was only beginning. Yet already the lines were drawn, the challenge given and the weight of truth pressing on the room. In that moment Elias knew the battle ahead would not be fought with weapons, but with words and memory, with the courage to drag the past into the light no matter how it burned. And he knew something else as well. The more the Frex resisted, the more the galaxy would wonder what they were hiding. And once that question was alive, it would spread faster than any fire the humans had ever made. The silence in the galactic council chamber grew heavier, the soundless weight pressing against the walls, as if the very air feared to move. The twin suns beyond the high glass dome burned in the sky, their light shifting into a deep gold that painted every scale, shell, and skin in molten color. Scholar Varken stood tall at the black stone podium, his silver scales catching the light, his 4 dark eyes fixed on Elias Ward with a gaze meant to cut through him like a blade. Yet the human envoy did not move, his calm stance only deepening the insult in the eyes of Threx. When Varken spoke, his voice was no longer the smooth tone of a practiced historian. It had sharpened, every word carrying the weight of fury barely held in check. You twist words, human, he said, his claws scraping against the stone as he leaned forward. You try to stain the honor of my people with your crude comparisons, but you know nothing of the truth. You were born in dirt, shaped by chaos, and it is that chaos that makes your kind dangerous. Every world you touch trembles under your hunger for power. The murmur of alien voices swelled again, some nodding in agreement with the scholar, others whispering doubts too low to hear. Elias let the words wash over him like a tide, unmoving, unblinking, until the last echo faded. Then he stepped closer, his voice still low and steady, yet carrying across the chamber without effort. If we are dangerous because we came from the wild, then so is every species here, scholar, for there is no life that begins in the comfort of perfection, only in the struggle to survive. Varken's tail lashed behind him, the smooth silver scales rattling faintly like a warning. His jaw tightened, his voice dropping to a growl that rolled through the hall. You dare accuse the Frex of falsehood before the eyes of the council. You dare question the first makers who shaped us in their image. You dare stand here, a child of beasts, and claim equality. Elias tilted his head, not in mockery, but as if weighing a man before him. Equality is not something I have to claim, scholar. It is something we live. And the truth is that you fear what will happen if your people look into their own past. Perhaps they will find scales torn and blood spilled in the mud. Perhaps they will find claws and teeth. Perhaps they will find that they too once fought for scraps of life, just as we did. The words hit like stones thrown into a still pond, sending ripples through the chamber, across the tiers of alien delegations, some shifting in their seats, others narrowing their eyes, a few looking down as if lost in thought. The Frex delegation remained rigid, their eyes locked on Varken. Yet a shadow of unease passed through even their ranks. Elias caught it, the small twitch of a claw, the tightening of a scaled hand against the armrest. Varken straightened, his voice rising again, his claws striking the podium in rhythm. Our history is recorded in the eternal codex. It speaks of our creation by the first makers, our rise free of the filth of primitive instinct, our minds pure from the start, our will untainted by the need to fight for every breath. Elias took another step forward, the soles of his boots soft against the polished black floor. Then show it, he said simply, his voice like steel under silk. Open your codex for all to see. Let the council read it. Let the galaxy decide if your purity is truth or only story. A wave of reaction swept the room, like wind through a field of grass, voices rising, some in shock, some in interest. Varken's eyes blazed, his silver scales darkening under the shifting light. The codex is sacred, he said. It is not for the hands of outsiders. Sacred or secret, Elias replied, his gaze unwavering. There's a difference, and secrets have a way of rotting in the dark until the truth comes out on its own. A sharp hiss came from one of the side tiers, a member of the feline-like Dravari race, their golden eyes locked on Varken. The Dravari were known for their pride, but also their honor, and the sound was one of challenge. Elias noticed, the council noticed. Varken's tail froze mid-swing, his jaw tightening further. You speak boldly for a representative of such a young world. Varken said, the words meant to cut. Your kind has barely touched the edges of the galaxy, yet you speak as if you own it. We own nothing, Elias said, his voice calm as a quiet before a storm. But we do not bow to lies, scholar, and neither should anyone hear. From the upper galleries, a voice called out in another language, sharp and fast, translated a moment later by the chamber systems. If the Threks have nothing to hide, why not prove it? The chamber shifted again, like a great beast turning in its sleep, eyes moving, attention focusing on Varken. The pressure mounting, the golden light of the twin suns deepening into a fiery orange as the day moved toward its zenith, casting long fingers of shadow that reached like claws across the chamber floor. Varken gripped the edges of the podium, his claws biting into the stone. The Threks do not answer demands, he said, his voice cold, and we do not reveal our sacred truths to those who would twist them. Or perhaps, Elias said softly, you do not reveal them because they would not serve your story. The words were quiet, but they struck like lightning, the chamber holding its breath, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself could shatter. Somewhere in the back, a low growl rose from a member of the Scale-Vashari species, not directed at Elias, but at Varken. A sound of suspicion, the kind that once spoken cannot be unsaid. Varken's gaze flicked toward the sound, then back to Elias. You think to divide us human, but you will fail. Elias allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile, not a mockery, but a certainty. I do not need to divide you, scholar. The truth will do that for me. The murmur of voices swelled again, this time louder, more restless. The chamber no longer entirely under control of the Threks or their scholar. The seed of Elias had planted was taking root. He could see it in the shifting eyes, the whisper exchanges, the way some delegates now avoided looking directly at Varken, as if afraid of what they might see reflected there. In the shadows beneath the upper gallery, a young aide of the avian Kyra species moved closer to her superior, whispering something that Elias could not hear. Yet the way her superior stiffened and glanced toward the Threks delegation told him enough, more than enough. There were cracks forming, small and hidden for now, but cracks that could spread until a whole structure gave way. The sun's light shifted again, burning deeper orange, the air warmer, the sense of time slipping forward, pressing into the chamber. The council speaker, an ancient insectoid being with translucent wings, tapped the staff of order against the floor, the clear chime ringing out and calling for silence. Yet the silence that came was not the same as before. It was sharper, edged with suspicion and curiosity. Varken's voice came again, but it was different now. The sharp edge is still there, but wrapped in a shell of forced composure. The Threks will not be shamed by the ignorance of others. We will stand by the truth of the Codex, and we will not allow lies to stain our history. Elias met his gaze, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner. Then open your Codex, and let us see if it is truth at all. The challenge hung in the air like the moment before a storm breaks, the chamber holding its breath, the shadows stretching longer, the fire of the sun's burning in the glass above. And though the session was far from over, Elias knew the battle had already begun, not with fleets or weapons, but with the most dangerous weapon of all, the truth waiting to be uncovered. The great chamber of the Galactic Council seemed to breathe with the weight of what had been spoken, each tier of alien delegations shifting in their seats, as if the truth itself had begun to crawl under their skin. The gold and orange light of the twin suns slanted low through the dome above, touching the banners and polished stone with a glow of fire. In the center, Elias Ward stood still, his hands loose at his sides, his mind steady, for he knew the moment had come to do more than speak. It was time to show. From a fold of his dark uniform, he drew a long, narrow case, its surface marked by the seal of Earth Command and the deep lines of age. The sound of the latch opening echoed softly through the hall, and when the case opened, it revealed an object so old that even the advanced lights of the chamber seemed careful not to harm it. Within lay the curved fossil of an early human ancestor, the bone heavy and dark from the weight of ages, each ridge and hollow telling a story of survival older than any star chart. Elias stepped forward, carrying the case to the great table at the heart of the council, the one place where no delegation's flag claimed ground. He set the fossil there with deliberate care, and the chamber leaned forward, eyes of every shape drawn to it, some in fascination, some in distaste. This, Elias said, his voice calm and low, is where we began. We do not hide it. We do not deny it. We carry it into the light for all to see, because we know that what matters is not how we began, but what we have become. A low murmur swept the tiers, the insectoid speaker tilting its head as if studying the fossil was some private thought. In the Threx delegation, Varken's claws tightened against the edge of his podium. His gaze locked on the object, as though it might leap forward and strike him. Elias turned slowly, letting his eyes pass over the gathered council. We know our past, he said, and we accept it. But I wonder, can all here do the same? The words were not shouted, yet they carried like an echo in the air, bouncing from wall to wall until they seemed to fill the whole dome. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd, and from the Dravari tier, one of the feeling-like diplomats tilted his head and spoke, his voice deep and smooth. Human, what is it you ask? I ask, Elias replied, that every species here place on this table the proof of their own beginning, not just the words of legend or the stories told to children, but the bones, the remains, the records that show the truth. The chamber stilled, and then a slow murmur rose like the first hints of wind before a storm. Varken's voice cut through it, sharp and hard. You insult the council. You insult the sacred histories of every world here. I challenge them, Elias said, meeting his gaze without a flicker. And if those histories are true, then they will withstand the light. From a far side of the chamber, a tall figure cloaked in deep green feathers rose, the representative of the Kyra, her long beak tapping once against the rail before she spoke. In my world, the first law of truth is that it fears no witness, she said, her voice like the call of wind through trees. I would see the Threx prove their words. A murmur of agreement rolled through several tiers, small at first, then growing. Like the steady beat of drums, Varken's silver scales shifted under the deepening light. The sharp line of his jaw set in stone, yet Elias could see the crack, the smallest twitch in the scholar's tail, the faintest draw of breath held too long. You dare demand sacred relics, Varken said, his voice quieter now, colder. You ask for what is not yours. It becomes ours, Elias answered. When it is used to judge us. The Dravari diplomat leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing on Varken. If the human's origin is open for all to see, then so should yours be, scholar. From the upper gallery, another voice rose, a deep rumble from a Vishari merchant whose scales gleamed bronze under the sun's glow. Perhaps the Threx fear what we would find. The hiss that left Varken's throat was sharp enough to silence the moment, yet silence now only served to make the room lean toward Elias. The human stepped closer to the great table and rested his hand near the fossil. Our ancestors fought with stone and fire. They hunted, they bled, they feared the dark, but they learned to tame it. They learned to build, to think, to hope, and in time to cross the void between worlds. This is not shame. It is the proof of our strength, and if any here can claim a better path, then I say show it. The speaker tapped the staff of order once, its chime clear, the tone not of reprimand but command. The chamber's eyes turned to Varken, the weight of the question heavy on his scaled shoulders. His 4 black eyes flicked toward his delegation, seeking counsel, but found only stillness. The Threx sat in rigid silence, their expressions a mask. Yet a mask is not the face, and Elias saw the faint edge of doubt in their gaze. Varken's voice came again, slow and deliberate. The Codex is not a thing to be displayed on a whim. Elias inclined his head slightly. And yet here we stand, the worth of my people questioned in front of every world, judged by a standard you yourself will not meet. The word spread like heat through the hall, not a shout, but a spark in dry grass, catching, growing, feeding on the unspoken thoughts that had begun to stir. In the Kyra. The feathered delegate gave a slow nod. In the Dravari seats, a low growl of agreement sounded. Even among the Vishari, heads turned toward the Threx with new light in their eyes. In the farthest tier, near the shadowed edges of the chamber, a figure in dark robes shifted. This one a young aide of the avian Kyra, her voice barely above a whisper as she leaned to her elder. "They will not show it, because they cannot," she said, the words slipping into translator feed just loud enough for a few around her to hear, and those few began to whisper to others. The suns outside dipped lower, their light now red gold, casting the chamber in the colors of a slow-burning fire, the air warm and thick with the scent of metal and old stone. Elias could feel the tide turning, not in a rush, but in a steady current that once begun would not stop. The fossil on the table was no longer just a relic of Earth. It was a challenge, a weight, a truth that demanded to be met. Varken's claws curled against the podium, his voice a controlled growl. "You ask for too much." Elias let the silence hang for a heartbeat, then said, "I ask for the same." The speaker's wings shifted, the faint sound like parchment in a breeze. "Scholar Varken," the speaker said, its voice carrying the weight of authority. "Will the Threx provide their proof?" The question rang through the dome, and for the first time since the session began, Varken did not answer at once. The pause spoke louder than any denial, and the chamber knew it. The murmur began again, this time no longer scattered, but building in strength, a tide of doubt and curiosity sweeping the tiers, the eyes of the galaxy turning toward one of its most powerful civilizations and asking, "What is it you hide?" Elias stepped back from the table, his gaze sweeping the crowd, knowing the seed had taken root. The truth was now a living thing in the chamber, and living things have a way of growing, no matter how hard anyone tries to keep them buried. The weight of the question still hung over the chamber like the shadow of a great beast circling above. Every eye fixed on Scholar Varken, as if willing the answer from his lips. Yet he stood silent, his silver scales catching the deep red light of the twin suns that now burned low in the sky, the glow spilling to the great dome and painting the banners and stone in the color of blood and fire. The silence was a living thing now, curling in the spaces between the tiers, pressing against the walls, creeping into minds of every delegate present. Then from the lower tier of the Kyra delegation came the sound of feathers brushing together, a young aide stepping forward from the shadow of her elder, her voice quiet but clear. "My people keep records older than our cities," she said. "And in those records there are mentions of the Threx in their earliest age, before they had ships, before they had speech as they do now. But those records are kept under seal by treaty with the Threx themselves." A ripple moved through the room, small at first, then growing as delegates leaned toward each other. The Threx delegation shifted in unison, every motion precise, controlled. Yet Elias saw the truth in the stiffness of their movements. It was a stillness of prey caught in open ground. Varken's voice came at last, low and sharp. "The Kyra speak of lies. Their records are flawed, built on rumor and fear." The young Kyra aide lifted her head, the deep green feathers along her neck flaring slightly. "Our records are copies of the original Threx histories. Scholar, the ones you gave us to hide." The word struck the chamber like the sudden crack of stone under heat. The speaker's wings shifted, the sound sharp in the tense air, and the golden eyes of the Dravari ambassador narrowed to slits as he studied Varken with new interest. Elias felt the current of the moment shift again, stronger now, pulling the weight of the council away from the Threx's control. Varken's claws scraped against the black stone of the podium, the sound like knives over glass. "No such exchange happened," he said, but even as the words left him, his voice lacked the unshaken steel it had carried before. The murmur of the chamber rose again, overlapping voices in dozens of tongues, the translators struggling to keep pace. From the Vishari delegation, a bronze-scale merchant leaned forward, his voice a deep rumble. "If these records exist, then they belong to the council now. The truth cannot be kept for one people alone." Varken's tail flicked once, a sharp motion of anger, but Elias stepped forward before the scholar could speak again, his voice even and steady. If the Kyra hold these records, then bring them to light. Let the galaxy see if the Threx's purity is as true as they claim. The young Kyra aide glanced at her elder, who gave a slow nod. Then she spoke again. The records are in the archives of my world, but copies exist here, in the council vaults, sealed by the Threx, under the category Restricted Cultural Data. A hush swept through the chamber. Even the soft hum of the translator system seemed to fade. The speaker's antennae lifted slightly, its ancient voice resonating in the still air. Scholar Varkan, is this true? For a long breath, Varkan said nothing, his eyes locked on the speaker, his claws flexing against the podium. And then he spoke. The vaults contain many things. Not all are meant for public display. That is not an answer, Elias said, his voice calm but with quiet edge. And in this chamber, silence speaks louder than truth. From the Dravari tier came a deep rumble, the sound of their ambassador's low growl. Open the vaults. The word spread, carried by the translators, picked up and repeated in the voices of other delegates. Open the vaults. Open the vaults. The sound growing, building like the tide pulling at the shore. The Threx delegation sat rigid, but the pressure was mounting, pressing in from all sides. The speaker lifted the staff of order and brought it down against the floor, the clear chime cutting through the growing chorus. If the council votes for release, the speaker said, the vaults will be opened. Varkan's head turned sharply, his black eyes blazing. This is a violation of our rights. This is a search for the truth, Elias said. And the truth belongs to all. The vote began, lights flashing along the tiers as each delegation cast their choice, the glow spreading faster than Varkan could speak. When the final light blinked into place, the chamber's central display lit with the result, a vast majority in favor, only the Threx and a handful of allies casting against. The decision was clear. The speaker turned its gaze toward the vault keepers, released the sealed records. Far above, in the ring of control stations that circled the chamber like a crown, technicians moved to obey, their long fingers sliding over crystal panels. Deep in the heart of the council's central archive, massive doors of alloy and stone began to shift, gears turning in silence, layers of security falling away one after the other, until at last the vault stood open, and within its dim light the sealed data stones of the Threx records glowed like coals waiting for air. A holographic projection bloomed into the space above the great table, a shifting cascade of symbols and images, ancient Threx script intertwined with moving depictions of a world untamed, great clawed creatures running across open plains, scale hunters wading through swamp and mire, tribes of early Threx fighting with stone blades and fire torches under a sky of twin moons, their silver scales dull with dirt and ash, their eyes wild with the need to survive. Gasps filled the chamber. The image of the so-called perfect species reduced to what Elias had named them, descendants of beasts, the truth hanging in the air like the scent of blood after the kill, undeniable and raw. Varkan's voice tore through the stunned silence. These are lies, distortions, fabrications. They are your own records. The young Kyra aide said, her voice firm. Your people gave them to us to hide, but the galaxy does not hide forever. The Dravari ambassador's golden eyes turned to Elias, his voice deep with a grudging respect. It seems the human speaks true. Elias looked to the speaker, then to the gathered council. Now you see why we do not hide our past, because in the light it cannot be used against us. But those who hide it only give it more power when it is found. The twin sun's light burned low and deep, flooding the chamber in the colors of an ending day. Yet Elias knew this was only the beginning, the first fracture in the wall of the Threx's authority. And from the sound of the murmurs, from the shifting in the seats, from the glances traded between once silent allies, the wall would not stand much longer. The air inside the council chamber felt heavier than before as the high scholar stood motionless, his four dark eyes narrowing at Elias like a predator cornered by something. It could not understand the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the floating lights above, which now seemed too bright against the tense expressions of the alien delegates, each of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Elias stood steady, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze never leaving the scholar's face. He knew the moment was fragile. One wrong move could shatter the chance to uncover the truth, and yet he could feel the pressure building not just inside himself, but in the minds of the others around him. Some of them wanted to speak, but fear kept their mouths shut. Then a deep voice broke through the stillness. It came from across the chamber, from a tall feline-like alien with golden fur that shimmered under the light. His long tail swayed slowly behind him, and his amber eyes burned with strange courage. He stepped forward, one clawed hand resting on the table before him, and spoke in a tone that carried the weight of old memories. My people's oldest stories speak of a time when we walked on four legs, when we hunted in packs under the twin moons, when we roared into the night with blood on our teeth. The feline alien said, his voice low, but clear enough for all to hear. Our ancestors were beasts, and yet here we stand in this hall as thinkers, builders, and leaders. A ripple of murmur spread across the chamber. Some of the other alien delegates exchanged glances, while others stared at the feline speaker, as if he had just broken a sacred law. The high scholar's expression darkened, his scale hands curling slightly, as if he was holding back rage. That is false and dangerous talk. The scholar hissed, his voice slicing through the air. You dishonor your own kind by repeating such primitive myths. But the feline alien did not back down. His tail lashed once behind him, and his ears flattened in defiance. They are not myths, they are our roots, and perhaps we have all forgotten too much in our desire to believe we were born perfect. Elias felt a spark of hope inside him. The silence that followed was no longer the silence of fear, but thought, deep and uncomfortable thought. He could see it in their faces, the questions forming the doubts, rising like cracks in a wall too long ignored. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, signaling that another delegate wished to speak this time. It was a smaller alien with translucent skin to which faint streams of blue blood pulsed like rivers beneath glass. She floated slightly above her seat, supported by a column of shimmering liquid from her water. Her voice was gentle, but carried strange power. My archives tell of ancestors with wide mouths full of teeth designed only for tearing flesh, she said, her transparent hands spreading the water. We were hunters in the cold black seas of our home world. We killed to survive, and survival was all we knew until we learned to think, to create, to build a future. Her words were met with sharp intakes of breath from several nearby seats. The high scholar shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the council guards, as if seeking control of the room before the tide turned further against him. But more voices were beginning to rise. From the far corner, an insectoid alien with long blade-like limbs clicked his mandibles together before speaking in a deep, buzzing tone. My kind came from the swarm knew only hunger and war, yet now we trade in peace and share knowledge, because we learned, because we changed. It was like a chain reaction. Once one dared to speak, the next followed. And then another, soon half a dozen delegates were telling fragments of their people's early history, stories filled with fangs, claws, stingers, and predatory eyes. They spoke not with shame, but with quiet pride that they had risen above what they once were. The high scholar slammed his hand down on the table, the sharp sound ringing through the chamber. Enough. He roared, his scales shimmering with tension. These are lies designed to weaken our unity, to make us question our rightful place above the beasts of the galaxy. Elias stepped forward, now his voice steady but laced with iron. Unity built on lies is no unity at all, and truth has a way of surviving even when you bury it. The feline alien looked to Elias and gave the smallest nod, a silent show of alliance. The translucent aquatic alien mirrored the gesture, her watery form rippling. As she floated closer to the center of the chamber, the insectoid remained still, but its faceted eyes never left Elias, as though weighing the human's worth. The scholar pointed at Elias, his clawed fingers shaking. You are not one of us. You have no right to challenge our history. Elias let the words hang in the air, then spoke in a voice just loud enough to cut through the murmurs. Maybe I am not one of you, but I am here, because my species faced the same truth. We did not hide from it. We embraced it, and we learned that our past does not define our worth. It only tells us where we began. Somewhere high above the chamber, the soft hum of the lights grew louder, or perhaps it only felt that way as the tension rose. The alien guards by the door glanced at each other, unsure whether to step in or wait. The council leader, an ancient being with smooth silver skin, sat silent, watching everything with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 years of judgment. The feline alien turned his gaze toward the leader. If our council is truly built on fairness, then let the archives be open for all species. Present, let the truth speak for itself. The aquatic alien added, We cannot call ourselves wise if we fear knowledge. The insectoid clicked its mandibles again. The swarm fears nothing, not even the truth. The chamber was alive, now no longer bound by the high scholar's grip. Whispers turned into open calls for a vote. The air was electric with a feeling that something long hidden was about to come into the light. The scholar's expression twisted between anger and fear as he realized control was slipping away from him. Elias took a slow breath, knowing the next moments would decide everything. He had not planned for this many allies, but the truth had a strange way of calling to those who needed it the most. He could see it in their eyes. This was no longer just about humans. It was about every being in the room. The council leader finally rose from his seat, his silver skin catching the twin sun's light through the chamber's massive windows. When he spoke, his voice was soft, yet carried across the hall. The request for archive access has been made and supported by multiple members of the council. It will be decided now. The scholar's claws dug into the table, his scaled tail twitching in agitation. This is madness, he growled, but no one moved to support him now. The vote began, and one by one delegates voiced their choice. Many chose to open the archives, a few remained silent or voted against, but their voices were drowned out by the growing tide of agreement. Elias stood, still his eyes fixed on the leader, his mind turning over what the archives might reveal, not just about the scholar's people, but about the galaxy itself. When the final vote was cast, the leader turned his gaze to the room. The motion passes, the archives will be opened. The reaction was immediate. A wave of mixed emotions swept the chamber. Some cheered softly, others looked pale or tense. The scholar remained frozen, his eyes unblinking, his scaled hands trembling ever so slightly. Elias knew then that whatever lay hidden was not just inconvenient for the scholar, it was dangerous. And in that moment, as the chamber buzzed with voices, Elias understood that the cracks in the lie were no longer just cracks. They were fractures spreading fast, and soon the entire wall of falsehood would come crashing down. The great chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with a deep silence as a command was given to open the sealed archives. A low mechanical hum echoed through the high stone walls. As towering silver machines awakened from their long slumber, ancient dust rising in slow spirals into the golden light from the tall windows, the vast hall seemed to grow smaller. As all eyes turned toward the central platform where the archives began to come alive, Elias Ward stood at the edge of the circle, his hands resting behind his back, his gaze sharp and unblinking. The alien delegates around him shifted nervously, some folding their scaled or feathered limbs tighter, as if bracing themselves for something they had long feared. To face the high scholar's skin seemed to darken, his scales tightening against his thin frame, his eyes darting from one delegate to another as if seeking an ally, but finding none. A low voice from the council speaker rang out, calling for full transparency across all member species. And a quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. The hum of the archive machine grew louder, the air filled with the faint scent of ozone and heat. Then a beam of pale light shot upward, forming a tall, shimmering pillar in the center of the chamber. Within, the light shapes began to move and form until a first holographic image appeared. It was the image of a towering creature covered in thick what for its face crude and animal, like its limbs heavy with muscle. As it dragged a crude weapon across a frozen plain, a gasp moved through the chamber. Some of the alien delegates leaned forward, their eyes wide. Others turned their heads away, unwilling to look. The speaker's voice explained that this was the earliest known ancestor of the feline, like the Thalarian people, and the Thalarian delegate lowered his head in shame, but spoke with a steady voice confirmed the truth. He said his people had always known, but had hidden it, because the council valued the idea of noble beginnings over reality of struggle and survival. Elias felt the energy in the room shift. Now the beam shifted again, and the image changed. It showed a hunched figure crawling from a dark cave with skin covered in rough scales and claws like hooks, its mouth filled with sharp, jagged teeth. The high scholar made a strangled sound, his four eyes narrowing. The speaker's voice announced that this was the ancestor of the scholar's own kind, the proud core who had long claimed to be born of pure creation and untouched by primitive evolution. Whispers filled the air. Some alien leaders stared at the scholar with open anger, others with cold disappointment. The next image appeared, this time showing a thin insect-like creature with translucent wings and mandibles that snapped at the air around it. It was hunched over a pile of raw meat, tearing into it. Without fire or tools, the insectoid delegate twitched uneasily, his antenna curling, as the speaker named this as the ancestor of the Akri, the people who now ruled vast star systems with elegance and order. And yet here was the truth in plain view. Elias noticed something in every reaction: shame, yes, but also fear. Fear not the images, but what the truth could do to the fragile balance of power. In the council, the archives continued one by one. Every species in the room saw their ancient selves shown for all to witness, some as hunters, some as scavengers, some as prey, yet all of them had been beasts in one form or another. And with each revelation, the murmurs grew louder and sharper until the chamber felt heavy with tension. The high scholar finally spoke, his voice trembling, but loud enough to carry across the hall. He accused Elias of orchestrating this to weaken the unity of the council. He claimed the images were false creations designed to humiliate his people. Elias did not answer at once. He simply turned toward the speaker and requested that the council's independent historians confirm the data a group of robed figures moved toward the beam there, devices humming softly as they scanned the holograms cross. Checking them with their own secure archives, when they turned back, their faces were pale. They confirmed that the data was real, unaltered, and undeniable. The High Scholar's voice broke. He shouted that this was a mistake, that their records had been corrupted over the ages, but no one seemed to listen. The truth had spread too far now. The alien delegates, who once looked at humanity with disdain, were now unable to deny that they shared the same kind of past. As the final image appeared, the room grew almost silent. It showed the ancestor humanity, a tall, yet wild creature with long arms and hair covering much of its body, walking upright across a grassy plain, carrying a sharpened stick. Its eyes, however, were not like the others. Its gaze was focused and steady, filled with a strange awareness, as if it already dreamed of something greater. Elias stepped forward and spoke in a calm voice, saying that this was their truth. They had come from beasts, yes, but they had used that beginning as a foundation, not as a chain. He said it was time to see that every species here had faced the same trial of survival, and that no one could claim to be above the rest, because the stars did not care where one began, only where one chose to go. The twin suns beyond the windows burned brighter, their light spilling into the chamber, as if to wash away the shadows that had lingered for centuries. The speaker turned to the High Scholar and asked if he still wished to claim his people were born pure. The scholar's mouth opened, but no words came. His hands curled tightly at his sides, his eyes, avoiding the stares of those around him. The chamber waited, but silence was the only answer, and in that silence something shifted in the hearts of the delegates. The idea of human inferiority had been broken, replaced by a shared understanding of humble origins. Elias watched as some of the alien leaders nodded slowly to him. An unspoken acknowledgement of respect. The moment was not one of triumph in the way battles are won with force. It was quieter, deeper, of victory, not of domination, but of truth. The archives shut down their light, fading into nothing. The beam dissolving into a faint mist that drifted toward the high ceiling. The mechanical hum slowed until it vanished, and the hall stood still again, but nothing was the same as it had been when the session began. Elias took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that this was not the end. There would be backlash. There would be whispers in the corridors and private meetings to try and undo what had been shown. But the seed was planted, and the truth had a way of growing even in the darkest corners of politics. The council speaker finally declared that the record of the archives would be made public across all worlds. A wave of voices rose in protest, but it was too late. The decision was final. The people of the galaxy would see for themselves, and each would draw their own conclusion. The High Scholar turned and left the chamber, his long robe dragging behind him like a shadow retreating from the light. The other delegates remained for a moment longer, some speaking quietly, others standing in thoughtful silence before dispersing. Elias remained at the center, watching them go, knowing the tides of history had shifted in this room today. When he finally left the chamber, the corridor beyond was lined with tall glass panels, showing the city outside vast, and glittering beneath the red-gold glow of the twin suns. Alien ships drifted between towering spires, their hulls catching the light like sparks in the air. The sounds of distant traffic mixed with the low hum of the council building's energy fields. Elias walked slowly, his reflection keeping pace beside him in the glass, his thoughts a mix of resolve and weariness. Yet there was a faint smile on his face, for he knew that despite the danger, despite the resistance, he had pulled back the curtain on a lie that had stood for generations, and now the galaxy were to look at itself honestly for the first time in a very long time. The great chamber of the Galactic Council was still heavy with the echoes of the truth that had been forced into the light, and the air felt thicker, as if the weight of countless centuries of hidden history pressed down on every delegate in the hall. And Captain Elias Ward stood at the center of the circle, his eyes sweeping across faces that no longer carried the same arrogant certainty that had been there before, and above the high ceiling the twin sun spilled a pale gold light through the wide crystal windows, painting every alien form with a glow that made even the proudest among them seem smaller and quieter than they had been only moments earlier. The High Scholar's scales had lost their shimmer, and now looked dull, almost gray, as his gaze remained locked on the floor before him, his four eyes blinking slowly, as if each blink was an attempt to escape the images that still flickered in the minds of all present. The holograms of his people, as they once were scavengers and carrion feeders, hunched over the corpses of fallen beasts, fighting each other with tooth and claw. And Elias knew that every delegate had been shaken not only by the revelation of the High Scholar's past, but by the fact that none of them had been spared from the truth. Every species had seen their primitive forms, their feral beginnings, and the realization had struck like a thunderclap. Elias did not speak at once. He let the silence grow heavier, letting the shame and reflection settle deeper into their hearts until the tension was almost unbearable, and then he stepped forward, his boots echoing faintly on the polished floor. And he looked not at the high scholar, but at the full circle of delegates, and his voice was calm, steady, carrying no malice, yet heavy with meaning. "We all came from beast," he said slowly, each word clear enough to cut through the thick air. "We all crawled from the dirt and the dark. We all fought and clawed our way to stand here today. And what matters is not where we began, but what we have chosen to build since then." A murmur ran through the chamber, soft and unsure, and a tall avian delegate shifted on her perch, her feathers ruffling as she lowered her gaze in thought. And across from her, the feline-like envoy, who had dared speak earlier about his people's furred ancestors, now held his head higher, his golden eyes fixed on Elias, with a faint look of approval. "Elias," continued his voice, gaining a quiet strength, "you call us dangerous because we remember what we were, and because we're not afraid to face it. But I tell you this, those who deny the past are the ones most likely to repeat it, and those who lie about it are the ones most likely to be ruled by it forever." The young alien aide who had earlier whispered about hidden records now stepped slightly out from behind her superior, her slender hands curling at her sides, as if she was gathering courage. And though she said nothing, Elias saw in her face the same thought, now moving through many in the chamber, that perhaps the council itself needed a change, perhaps the truth should never have been hidden at all. The high scholar finally looked up, his eyes dull with defeat, yet still clinging to a shred of pride, and he asked quietly, "Why would you expose us all like this, human? What do you gain from shaming every world here?" And Elias met his gaze without flinching. "This was never about shame," he said. "It was about honesty. If we are to stand together as a council, if we are to face the dangers that lie beyond these suns, we must stand as equals, and we cannot be equals if we build our unity on lies." Another murmur rose, this one louder than before, and it carried not just unease but agreement. And the insectoid ambassador, whose people had been shown in the archives as swarming hunters beating their prey with crude tools, clicked his mandibles softly in a gesture of reluctant respect. Outside the great windows, the suns rose higher, the light burning away more the shadows, and casting the floor in sharp lines of gold, and Elias stepped back to give space to the council, letting them speak among themselves, letting the truth settle like seeds that would grow in time into something stronger. The feline envoy stood and addressed the chamber in his deep, rumbling voice. "We all have carried pride in our origins, but pride built on lies is weak. Perhaps it is time we accept that what we were does not diminish what we are now. Perhaps it is time to teach our young the whole truth, so they will walk into the future without fear of the past." Heads nodded slowly, some with reluctance, but none with outright refusal, and Elias felt a small current of hope move through the room like a breeze after a long storm, and the avian delegate rose next, her feathers catching the sunlight in bright flashes. And she said, "Perhaps a human is right. Perhaps the danger is not that we came from beasts, but that we might become them again if we forget where we started." The high scholar did not rise. He simply lowered his head a fraction, as if conceding the point, though no words passed his lips, and Elias knew that for some the lesson would take longer to settle, but the seed was there, and the truth, once seen, could not be unseen. Slowly the council chair tapped the great stone in the center, signaling the end of the session, and the delegates began to file out in small clusters, speaking quietly to each other, their steps slower than usual, as if each was still carrying the images of their ancestors in their minds, and Elias remained where he was, watching them go, his expression unreadable but his heart steady. When the chamber was nearly empty, the young alien aide approached him, her large eyes filled with something between gratitude and fear, and she said in a low voice, "I think you've changed something here today, human. Not all will admit it, but they will remember." And Elias gave a small nod. His voice soft change takes time, but the first step is always to speak the truth. As she turned to leave, Elias stepped toward the great windows, his hands clasped behind his back, and he looked out over the alien city below, towers of crystal and metal rising toward the twin sun, streets alive with beings from 100 worlds moving together in the light. And he thought of the long path humanity had walked from its own beginnings of fire and stone to this place among the stars, and he knew that the path ahead would be just as long and just as hard. But now the truth was out, and the lies had been broken, and that meant there was a chance for the council to be more than a stage for pride and rivalry, a chance for it to become what it was meant to be. And as the suns climbed higher and the shadows vanished entirely, Elias Ward allowed himself the smallest of smiles, because in that moment the galaxy had taken its first honest breath in centuries.